What is very exciting about this particular assignment is that there are so many representatives of different cities around the world. I feel like the world is in this very room with us this evening. So welcome. You are very welcome to a conversation and cocktails about cities in transition and their opportunities for growth. The evening is hosted by UN Habitat and UNACLA. UN Habitat is the city agency of the United Nations. UNACLA is the organization of local authorities and over 70 mayors around the world who help to advise UN Habitat. The main theme of this evening is looking at the potential that UN Habitat has to work and partner with cities around the world. It's the only UN agency that actually works directly with cities and not actually with countries. So it has a very personal touch. There's a very natural synergy between UN Habitat and also Metropolis. In tonight's program, you will hear from the Executive Director of UN Habitat, that is Dr. Joan Clos, as he illustrates and sets out his vision for how UN Habitat can partner to help cities in transition. Let me introduce you to our star guest for this evening. Dr. Joan Clos is the head of UN Habitat. He was formerly the mayor of Barcelona for 2 terms, which gives you an idea of his credentials. Sometimes in the UN, the heads of the United Nations agencies don't always have direct experience or skills or insight into the agency that they're working on. But with Dr. Clos's case, he can use all of his experience as his former mayor and bring it to UN Habitat. He wants to tell you how it's possible for UN Habitat to work directly and partner with cities around the world. It's an intriguing vision. Please make it easy for Dr. Clos to come to the stage. Dr. Clos.
Thank you very much, Femi, for the presentation. I would like really, Mr. Mayor and friends, to have this opportunity to establish a dialogue and to share ideas about the urbanization process in the world, which you will agree with me, which is a process which is very relevant, it's very important, and it's one of the driving forces, social and political forces of the 21st century. You know that more than 50% of the population is already urban. You know that last month we celebrated the 7th billion human in planet Earth. And it seems that in the near future, we are going to reach 9 billion people and that we are going to increase to 65% of urban population. That means that urban population in the next 20 years, it's going to grow on top of the population growth. This is a huge process of urbanization, never seen before in human history. And it's really very challenging because it poses a lot of problems, a lot of questions about the urbanization process. We know, for example, that in sub-Saharan Africa, we have more than 60% of the urban people living in slums. We know, for example, also that in sub-Saharan Africa, the urban population is going to double in just 10 years, 12 years. And if it's going to double in 10 years, 12 years, and 60% of them lives in slums, that means, because in 10 years there's no time to plan for the growth of a city, that most of these people is going to, to be in slums. And this is really a dramatic issue, and in a way, a humanitarian catastrophe, which will require and need a lot of thinking on the future cities. In the past, in the last 20 years, I would say that most of the mood that it has been in fashion at approaching the city issue, it was pessimistic. The city is a problem. The city is a conflict. The city is poverty. The city is inequality. The city, mainly most of the urban challenges have been presented in the last 10, 15 years as problematic ones. It seems that we have forgot our illustrated, enlightened, optimistic view of the city. The city as a place of growth, the city as the place of equality, the city as the place of freedom, the city as a place of culture, the city as a place of, in general, good social things. The conflictual view of the city has predominated the analysis of the city. And this is very, very sad, because still the finance minister of each country knows that most of the taxes that he or she collects is in the cities. And we also know the employment minister of most of the countries knows that when it measures employment, most of the employment it's in the city. Although there's a lot of unemployment and there's a lot of informal economy in the cities, there's true also that most of the employment growth is taking place in the cities. And then why such a pessimistic approach to the city? Why the gloomy vision of the city has, gained the scenario? Hardly we see a positive news in the media about city. Usually it's the negative views. Either social conflict, burning districts in developing world or in developed world, increase of inequalities, increase of poverty, etc. I think that the analysis why this pessimistic approach has been predominant, it's something that we need to investigate, because we need to change that. We need to regain the positive view of the city, because in a society which is dominated by stereotypes, we need that the city recovers its own place and its real place in the national scenario. I think that if we look at the nowadays existing city, there are differences between different countries, but in general I would say that the city, it's generally in an economical crisis all over the world, except perhaps China and I don't know if there's any other city, perhaps Brazil. Local governments are striving for, with lack of resources. It seems that the demands of the population are much higher than the financial capabilities of the cities. There's another good study subject. Why are cities, if they are economically and financially so important for the countries, why are the cities suffering this lack of resources? I was trying to think about that, and I was trying to remember the history of my own city, Barcelona. And when Barcelona was built in the 17th, 18th and 19th century, the share of the public expenditure in each country, which was in hands of the local authority, which was much higher than what is it today. In fact, 300 years ago in our part of the world, the richest institution was the local government, and the poor institution was the central government. In fact, it was the central government who went to the cities to ask for money to the mayors. It was usually for the war. And looking at the history of my city, for example, there are very nice records of the 15th, 16th century where the city contributed 5,000 people and let's say 1,000 horses for such war, and plus some kind of real money to pay for things. It was the king who asked money to the cities. And the cities, with the taxation system of the city, which was mainly in the doors of the city with the incoming products and outgoing exports of the city, they were collecting money, and with this money, they built the walls of the city, and they did other public services. What is the situation nowadays of a mayor? And we have here some mayor, and they can contradict me. Today is the other way around. The mayor is begging the central government, please give me some money because I need to solve a question, that problem. In the last 200 years, it has produced, the social construct. It has created a total change of roles in the public goods administration, where the central state, it has many, they say, it has many responsibilities. It should keep an army, it should keep, too many things, and then the problems and the needs of the cities are there in the list, not usually in the first priority. And how is that? Because we can go back again. If the city is the biggest source of income for the financial institutions of the country, why we altogether don't care for the city if it's the institution that at the end produces most of the wealth? It's said in most of the countries that 70%, 80% of the GDP of the countries are produced in urban areas. This is statistics which is replicable both in developed and in developing countries. Then why they need the cities to beg for money if they are the engine of fiscal resources? Why don't we establish a new relationship, a new partnership between local government and the national government in order to care for the city? And I think that there are many explanations for that. In that sense, it's quite clear that historically, with the emergency of the central state and the nation state, the power of the city governments has diminished. At least compared to my part of the world, from which I come from, where we had these city-states. We had these kind of cities which had their own charter, which was, in a way, independent from, it had a very high degree of independency in relation to the central government. Let's review a little bit the urban economics, because I always tend to criticize the economic science that it has been not clear enough in order to explain the source of wealth in the urban areas. The textbooks, they say that in the urban areas there are two sources of wealth. Urban wealth, direct wealth generated by the city. One is the urban economies. Urban economies are this kind of economies, this kind of wealth or value, which is generated by the fact that some spaces, the land mainly and other characteristics, are catalogued as urban, and when you have a piece of land which previously is rural or forestry, and one day you put in the public record that this land is not anymore rural, not anymore forestry. It's urban. What happens with the price of this land? Goes up. Then, just by the fact of the catalog of the land, you generate value. This value, it's immense. It looks a minor thing, but it's very big. There's a lot of people who knows a lot about this value. Mainly developers. Developers, they are real masters of knowledge about urban value. They know which piece of land is going to increase the value. They know how to buy it when it's cheap and sell when it becomes expensive. And they are real masters of this part of the urban science. Sometimes local authorities are not so knowledgeable about urban value. But this is another question. There's a second source, the textbook says, about the urban value. And this is the economies of agglomeration, or the economies of scale. Nothing to do with urban value. Nothing to do. It's another source of value. And the economies of agglomeration or economies of scale, it has another dynamic. It's another thing. It's the fact that with density, you have the factors of production very close one to the other. If you are in a city and you build a house and you need a very good chap who is going to be able to build this thing, you can find the chap that can build this roof with higher probability in a big city than in a small rural and lost area in the mountains. Then in the city, you have different factors of production which are nearby. If you need the people who build this lighting and system, it's more probable that you find it in a big city than in a rural area. And if you need some chap that knows really how to put these pieces in a proper way, it happens the same, etc. And the city, the density of the city generates, due to the proximity of the factors, a kind of economical miracle, which the economist describes as cost of transaction diminished, productivity increases. That's another magic thing which generates a lot of value. A lot of value, much more value than the economies of urbanization. What is the issue? What is the problem? Economies of urbanization is catched by the public sector mainly by property tax. And the economies of agglomeration is catched not by property tax, it's catched by income tax and by company tax, the tax of the profit of the companies. Then the way to recover the wealth, it's divided. Property taxes in one side and company taxes or income taxes. Usually, as income tax and company taxes were developed in the 20th century, the beginning of the 20th century, those taxes are collected by whom? By the central government. Usually, it's very hard to find a country when company taxes and income taxes are controlled or collected by local governments. Usually, it's the central government or federal government even the one which collects those taxes. And this is the source of the 60% or 80%, depends of the country, income collected by central government. Then a new approach we need to develop in order to convince the society that national investment should be placed at local needs. Because we run the risk of not caring enough of the asset which is producing more wealth in the country. And it's quite clear. It should be quite clear. It's not the case, I am sorry to say, because when you look at the taxes that are controlled by local authorities in international statistics, it depends. There are some exceptions, but the most of the countries is about 2%, 3%, 4%. If they are very fortunate, 5%. Come on. This is peanuts in relation to the productivity of the urban tissue, urban fabric, and of course, by the way, it's peanuts in relation to the needs of the city. And well, this is something that we need to develop and to articulate and to defend in a proper narrative, because otherwise what we are seeing in the world is this decaying fabric of the city. The city really, either in housing or in public space or in other, clear symptoms, it's falling down, it's decaying. And this is not even wise. It's not that it's not proper, it shouldn't be like that. My point that I want to propose today is that it's not even wise. It's like to shoot at your foot. How do you say that in English? You are killing, you are not caring. That means that the political force, because nobody will give resources to the cities if you don't fight for them. Then there's a renewed need of a strong position in order to defend the role of the cities in the national economy. This is why I am a little bit critical about the economic sciences, because they don't put enough stress on the relevance of the city as a production of wealth, of national wealth. The other thing that is happening is the huge growth of the city, mainly driven by natural growth of the existing population and also by migrations. Rural-urban migrations. Here we have some different scenarios in the world, which is not the same all over. In the developed world, the city is not growing anymore. In fact, in the developed world, when we consider income per capita of over $35,000 per capita, the cities are not growing. The cities, in fact, are diminishing in population and are sprawling over the land. And they are diminishing their density. And this is quite a problem which presents its own challenges. But if you look at what is happening, not in the West, in the global West, but in the emerging countries like China, India, Brazil, South Africa, Turkey, etc., these economies which are in the branch of between, let's say, $5,000 to $20,000 per capita, we are seeing a totally different situation. And the situation that we are seeing is the growth of urban population, which is linked to industrialization. Industrialization as a social dynamic, it's generating jobs in the cities, and people go to the city because there are jobs. In that sense, what is happening now in China or in India, on what we saw before in Korea or in Japan after the Second World War, It was a 20th century migration to the urban setting, but a classical one in the sense that it was linked with industrialization. But what is happening in sub-Saharan Africa? In sub-Saharan Africa, we are seeing huge migrations to the city without industrialization, without real massive industrialization. And in that sense, what is happening in South Africa, in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, it's new. There's not much past history of those huge migrations to the urban areas without industrialization. Without industrialization and huge migrations, what happens? No jobs, 60% of the people unemployed in a city, youth unemployment, informal economy, and slums. No way to produce the jobs which this huge migration requires. With this reality, how are we going to build the city? This is really a huge question mark, which is not written in any textbook. This is genuinely a new issue, at least because of the scale, or due to the scale of the movement, the scale of the phenomenon. It's very difficult to deal with a city with 60% of the people living in slums and 60% of unemployment and 70% of informal economy. And this is the huge challenge, at least of sub-Saharan Africa, but also some parts of Asia and some parts of America. This is why, from the UN point of view, we are trying to promote this kind of debate in order to see, well, what are we going to do? What is going to happen? Because this is unsustainable, at least socially. But also there's another issue. We have the climate change, which is a kind of thing that it happens on top of everything. This is, in a way, is not new, but for our perception, is quite new. It's just 20 years that we talk about climate change. There are still some countries that today deny climate change. Fortunately enough, every day less and less people denies, we are seeing in the TV every day the flooding of Bangkok, which I think it's just with this image, there's enough it should be enough to stop the debate about climate change. Climate change is a reality, and the challenge that climate change is posing is so huge, and interestingly enough, the developing city is not the main emitter of greenhouse gases, but is the main sufferer of the climate change. Then shall we go crying, every one of us now, to the room and forget, and just to drink a caipirinha and see if we resist the night and tomorrow would be another day? No. I think that there's hope. I think that it's future. I think that the city is still, and it's going to be, the source of wealth. But the issue, the question, is that we need to articulate a good argument in order to gain position and capacity of action. This is, what I leave now to the debate. I think that if we can elaborate a little bit, what is the next step? What is the step forward? How can we really improve the chances of the city in the 21st century in order to avoid the final catastrophe, the burning city, this unequal city, this anomic city, this city without identity, and this very gloomy aspect of the city. But let's talk about that. Let's share ideas. Thank you.
At some point during Dr. Clos's conversation, he said, if there are any mayors in the room and you want to contradict me, please do. So I'm very excited about this part of the conversation where you actually get to speak directly to Dr. Clos. So if you can just put your hand up for a moment for people who have questions so I can see where in the room there will be questions. You might want to think about it for a moment. And while you're thinking about it, let me start with the Mayor of Johannesburg, who I volunteered to ask the first question. So when you have your questions, if you could introduce yourself and then pose them to Dr. Clos.
No, just two questions really. The first relates to a point that you raised in relation to taxation and tax solutions. As South African cities, we're putting together a proposal to replace a local business tax which was abolished a few years ago and replaced with a grant from national government. The contest has always been about whether in fact it's appropriate for local government to levy a tax as opposed to property tax. And our argument has consistently been that with increasing numbers of urbanization, the decay of infrastructure and the need to extend infrastructure to other communities, we need to find solutions. The contest from government remains that local government should focus on property tax and the transactional issues of utilities and leave income tax and business tax to be levied by national government. Now, how do we resolve that? Because we're about to make a submission jointly as local government and urban centers in South Africa to get access to a local business tax.
I think that is something that we see in a lot of countries. Local authorities are kept with local property taxes, and all the rest of the taxes are kept in the central government. It has an historical reason that property taxes were developed. Let's say even the Romans already had property taxes. The history of property taxes, probably it's more than 2,000 years old. And it has been mainly related to very local authority, nearby power. In a poor economy, an economy, let's say, of less than $3,000 per capita, the share of the wealth which derives from property, land mainly, it's very high. It can be 60% of the wealth of the country which is related to land. When you grow in your economy, you have industrialization, and then you climb to, let's say, $10,000 per capita, and then $15,000 per capita, $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 per capita, the share of the wealth that comes from property, it diminishes. It's nearly zero, because there are other assets, mainly stocks, bonds, which take the role of the drivers of the wealth. Even you have the companies, you have the stock exchange, you have the insurance industry, you have the financial industry, and there's a lot of wealth everywhere. That this wealth, it's again not catched by property tax. And the income tax and the company tax were invented at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century. And those are invented by the nation state. We invented, the local authorities, we invented the property tax. But the modern taxes, and don't tell the value-added tax, the VAT. This is just, it's a tax that it just has a history of 30 years. This is very modern. Then the state says, national state says, no, if I invented it, this is for me. Okay. And on top of that, we are now in an anti-tax mood. Everybody's in favor of diminishing taxes. And you don't have a very much good electoral perspective if you go telling that you are going to increase the taxes. Because, this is, if one begins to say, I want to diminish the tax, what is going to say the other nearby, And me too, 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 and me too. And at the end, we have a problem. We have entered a down circle, a vicious circle of, shooting at our foot again, because we are in an anti-tax mood, which is, of course, if there's no taxes, how are we going to finance the public goods? Because the city is mainly about public goods, isn't it? We need to build the street. And nobody owns the street except we all together own the street. And as a common good, we need to pay for it. Or the public transportation system, the mass transportation system, who is going to pay for it? And of course, this is there's no easy answer to that. I don't know the answer. But the fact, as you say, is that the state is very jealous of the taxes that they invented. And they don't want to share it very easily. And this is again a question of new power debate in order to re-equilibrate the things, because this isn't sustainable. This cannot go like that. Thank you.
My name's Tim Campbell. Dr. Clos, I heard a very powerful message from in your words today that I haven't heard in a long time. I've been started in the World Bank 20 years ago, participated in urban strategies for the World Bank, but nothing went quite as far as you have gone here in saying that we need a new relationship, that the heart of the relationship is a financial one, and that if we're going to solve some of these other problems, the public goods problems, for instance, then we've got to change that relationship. That, to me, is a fresh start, and I applaud you for it. But, of course, it's a long road. You mentioned a number of sources of wealth in the city, the land, agglomeration, economies, which is quite right. And I think there's another one there, of course, you may know from my work, is there's knowledge in the cities also, something that can be shared. I'm noticing, now I'm going to come to the question, I'm noticing that your new message and the new relationships also goes to private interests, that those public goods that are to be financed by new taxes and new sources of wealth, financial wealth in the city, benefit businesses there who create the jobs. Okay, so they have to be part of the conversation. So my question is, and they're also, I can see they're also already a part of the conversation in the knowledge exchange. The Ciscos, the Philips, the IBMs, they're out there selling these goods and these ideas. My question to you then is, Dr. Clos, can you share with us the reactions you're getting from the private sector, your perspectives about how the corporate sector, I'm speaking globally and nationally, and even in individual cities, are you getting a receptive audience? Yeah.
Let me answer with a practical example that it happened to me in my exercise as mayor. During the Olympic Games, in the preparation of the Olympic Games, I was the financial chap of the city government, and of course we were preparing for things, and then we reached the conclusion that we needed more hotels in the city. for the future of the city, not just for the Olympic Games, for the future of the city. And then we called the hotel business sector in Barcelona, just in a room, because they were 20 chaps, and we tell, okay, we are going to double the number of hotel rooms in the city. We need to double the hotels rooms in the city. Do you agree? What they say? Yes. No. No. Because why are we going to increase the offer? Our prices will diminish. Then we don't want you to increase the number of hotels in Barcelona. Because, you know, we have a lot of problems. In Friday and Saturday, the rooms are empty. And we have our investment there and it's not, you know, working. Of course, we were convinced that the increase of the offer was a solution. But the sector saw the increase of the offer as a problem. Okay? Then we said, anyway, we are going to double the rooms in the city. I remember the figures because we had 22,000 beds and we established 44,000 beds. And they said we are going to call for, even we are going to allocate public land for hotels because hotels for the Olympic Games and the future of the city are a crucial social investment. Then, please, any of you that want to bid for those hotels, please come and bid for the hotels. We did the public bid for the 6 Olympic hotels, which was just part of the effort to double the size. And how many of the locals came to the bids? None. It was a coalition of them, and they agreed not to go for the bid in Barcelona. This is history. Huh? And then the international firms of the international business came to Barcelona and they took the 6 hotels, Olympic hotels. Plus, there was a lot of investment and we, you know, begin the process of increasing the hotels. We had the Olympic Games, everything, and 5 years later, it was 1997, we had another meeting with the sector. Now the hotel rooms were already 40,000. The business of hotels in Barcelona, it was booming. It was so good that after the Olympic Games, they go back and they bought the hotels themselves because they didn't want to lose the business. And we established a new dialogue with them. And what are you saying? And publicly, the chairman of the hotel sector made a public statement saying the city was right, we were wrong, they did us a huge favor, and, you know, sorry. Then, in that sense, of course, the private sector, it's going to be favored by a good city. This is, for me, it's very clear. And this is perhaps, sometimes, perhaps it's going to be more easy to convince the private sector than the national government.
Bueno, en realidad yo soy Claudio Zule de Chile. No me preocupa tanto en realidad si es el nivel local el que capta el impuesto o no, porque eso podría ser inclusive regresivo y podría ser generar una inequidad entre ciudades, ¿no? Podrían haber ciudades más ricas que otras y con más capacidad de captar recursos. Entonces eso me parece que habría que revisarlo. El sistema de captación en definitiva importa, ¿verdad? Importa que sea nacional, local, que sea a través de impuestos o sea a través de empresa pública también, que es una alternativa. aunque parece que no está muy de moda, pero es una alternativa. Por lo menos en Medellín trabajan muy bien las empresas públicas y generan bastante riqueza al gobierno local. Pero bueno, una cosa es cómo capta uno, o sea, el recurso y cómo lo genera, pero creo que lo más importante está en cómo se gasta. O sea, cómo se decide el gasto y qué nivel de participación tiene una vez que se distribuye, se redistribuye más o menos equitativamente entre las ciudades de un país, qué nivel, ¿verdad?, de participación tiene el nivel local y qué nivel de participación tiene en eso la comunidad misma, en la decisión de en qué y cómo se gasta el recurso.
Yes, for the ones who could not follow in English, he's saying that as important as how to capture value is to decide how to spend the value, okay? Yes, but when I was a mayor, my main concern was catching resources. You know, I had many thoughts about how to spend them, but really my headache was how to catch them. You know, to spend, there's good ideas, and everybody gives you ideas in order to how to spend them. And even, you know, there's plenty of creativity here, but the tough job is to get the resources. I understand your point, but from the practical, I can explain also my experience, and we can share with the mayor of Johannesburg or others of you which are in city. If I spend that, my time was on that issue was 80% of catching resources and 20% on how to spend. I had a lot of help in order to decide where to spend. No much help in order to decide how to catch resources. Then being a little bit pragmatic, because you know we mayors, we became very cynical, and we tend to we became hyper realistic chaps, and you know we need to tackle with huge problems every day, and they are very pressing demands, and I think really my point, the one that I want to defend here today, is that there's a lack of equilibrium between the need of the cities and the resources allocated to them. And this is something that, as Tim was saying, needs to be addressed. And if it's not addressed, we are not going to solve the issue of climate change, adaptation. You know the cost of the investment required to avoid the floodings in Bangkok. You know, can we imagine the cost required in Bangkok in order to avoid the next flooding? Or if you look at some cities which have problems in structural resistance of buildings against earthquakes, like in Haiti, can we imagine the cost of preparing Haiti for the next earthquake? And then, yes, we cannot just wait. We need to convince our societies, because it's not just the political sector at the end, it's our societies, including the stakeholders, the private sector, that this is wrong. How things are today is wrong. And if we keep in that direction, we are going to face problems. And it's better to prevent them than then to cry for the lost. No? Thank you.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Leonardo Maramara, vengo de Venezuela. Quería plantearte, cuando usted, profesor, decía acerca del tema de defender una estrategia, para mañana creo que a las 3 de la tarde el alcalde de Ciudad Bolívar va a plantear una estrategia que estamos viviendo en Venezuela. Es como enfrentar lo que es el conocimiento del desarrollo, de enfrentar la recolección del impuesto. En mi país se ubica la evasión un 80% a nivel general, donde los municipios reciben solamente el 30% de su gasto administrativo y el 70% tienen que buscarlos de los impuestos. Entonces, normalmente los políticos son políticos, no son recaudadores, muy pocas veces son administradores, muy pocas veces son estratégicos. Y mi experiencia en Venezuela ha sido que la participación que se le da a la estrategia que usted defiende, nosotros la partimos desde el punto donde dándole cabida a las empresas privadas especialistas en el área de tributos. Nosotros manejamos una consultoría SAP, donde esa participación que invita al alcalde a que el empresario invierta y arriesgue es para generar resultados de ingresos. Nosotros vivimos una recaudación. Mañana el alcalde, cuando llegue, él es de una alcaldía muy al sur, en la parte minera de Venezuela. Ellos tenían una evasión del 80%, ahora se ubica en un 42%. Una recaudación mensual que tenía de 3 millones de dólares, ahora la tienen 14 millones de dólares. Está superando el ingreso que él esperaba, porque había una cultura, y yo creo que en todos los países latinos se maneja, que no es el pagador, sino es el mal cobrador. El político no sabe cobrar el impuesto, no tiene la cultura, no sabe cómo ingresar el ingreso, cómo decirle al contribuyente. Y en Venezuela nosotros tenemos una cultura, el pagador de impuestos es fiel, porque no recibe nada a cambio, sino una sola papelito que dice solvencia, que le va a ayudar a tramitar una serie de actividades financieras para seguir produciendo. Entonces, ese impuesto que él paga, que se ubica por debajo del 80, mientras toma agua allí, observamos que básicamente lo que falta es que el político no ha sabido enfrentar la cobranza del impuesto. Entonces, nosotros con una solución estratégica donde le enseñemos, donde le estructuremos y le coloquemos tecnología, porque al contribuyente hay que ponérsela fácil para que él cancele fácil. Ahora estamos enfrentando, esa primera etapa la enfrentamos, ahora estamos enfrentando la segunda etapa, que es cómo el político va a gastar el dinero, porque también ese es un problema muy fuerte en nuestro país.
In English, I'm going to explain you my personal experience. In my country, usually, in general, 50% of the income of the cities comes from local taxes, and this is applied by the city, and 50% it's coming from grants from the central government. It's a good equilibrium, 50-50. Huh? But the central government transference to the city, it has a correction in the formula, in the parametric formula, that it's called the fiscal effort of the city. That you are penalized from the central government tax if you don't collect your own taxes. Okay? In order to avoid tax dumping, because there's people, if there's not that correction, that they diminish their local taxes, or they demand more money to the central government. In order to avoid this perversity, there's a parameter in the grant formula by which you measure the fiscal effort of the city, and if your fiscal effort diminish, the central government, the central government grant diminish. Okay? Because otherwise you would be competing with your other local authorities to diminish the taxes. Huh? That's to say that is our case, but that's to say that there are solutions. There are experiences around the world, nearly 200 countries in the world. It allows for many different systems, some successful, and some of them failures. This is something that we can help you. As we are there to look at the world from UN point of view, we know the fiscal experiences all over the world. And if you want to know how they do, we can find out this information for you, okay? By the way, the biggest urbanization process in the world now is taking place in China, isn't it? What happens in China? You know about local finances in China? You know about that? First, local entities in China, they are economically powerful or weak?
Powerful from back here.
Powerful, yes. Economically, very powerful. Politically, they don't have autonomy, but economically, they are extremely powerful. What has been the mechanism in order to pay for the huge urbanization of China that in 15 years they are urbanizing the country and they are a population of more than 1 billion people? The central government is giving the land to the city and the city can sell the land to the market. As a socialist economy in the past, the land was public and now it's being privatized. Then the city auctions the land to the private sector and the private sectors buy the land. And this is a huge source of resources to the Chinese local authorities, and with that they are building roads and they are building everything. Of course, that has a problem, because you can only sell one time. Here the preoccupation is, well, and when we have sold all the land, how are we going to do the maintenance of our roads? How are we going to pay for the cleaners of our streets? That's another question that the Chinese, they will need to face. But, you know, it's very interesting to see that the huge and biggest urbanizing exercise that it's today taking place in the world is financed by a very peculiar way, irrepeatable, which is the selling of the land. And that poses, I don't know the bank, how they analyze this phenomena, but this poses a very interesting question on what is the sustainability of this model. But, you know, the Chinese, they are very clever, and I'm sure that they will find out a way. Probably they are going to introduce some kind of tax in order to keep not the selling of one stock, but a flux of money which is repeatable. Very interesting different models on the way of how to finance for local infrastructures.
Mark Weiss from Global Urban Development. And first, I just want to thank you for your great heart and long-time commitment and to urban leadership, and especially now that, as you're doing right here, being a truth teller for the world in addressing these vital issues of a sustainable future. Olympics in Barcelona was actually, I think, broke the mold and set a new standard for Olympic Games in terms of using the Olympics as a catalyst for a very successful economic development strategy that created many jobs and much business growth and much wealth, which wasn't only good for Barcelona, but for the region, for Catalonia, and for Spain, for the whole country. And so, starting with that point of view, that the cities are the generators of the GDP and wealth. And given this fiscal problem, I think you explained very well why the central governments are jealously protecting their revenue sources and not wanting to give up control back to the cities. However, I would like to, when you went to Madrid, you were dealing with national economic growth. So this is the question, why is it that the central governments, the federal governments, even if they don't want to give the money as a revenue source or give it back to the cities, why do they not want to make the strategic investments in infrastructure and services in the urban areas that will enable the national wealth to grow and everyone in the cities and everywhere else to benefit from that growth?
Well, this is the billion dollar question, because if we could address this question, we will solve the problem. But I don't know. I even have been in the central government, and I don't know. But some thoughts. Huh? First, when we talk central government or local government, it's not just talking about entities. We are talking about where is the power. It's not that the central government now it's doing that, and the local government. It's that the power has shifted from local government to central government. And the one who has the power now is the national state. And then, of course, once you have the power, you do whatever you consider best. And then there's not going to be reequilibrium if there's no reequilibrium of powers. That's a more, if you want, sociological point of view. The second thing, and this is again very pragmatic. I'm going from the very high theory to the very low pragmatic thing. I wonder, do the electoral laws or the electoral system have anything to do with that? You know, because how we choose the representatives in our governments. Because the electoral systems, for example, they tend to protect more the rural areas in front of the urban areas. Why? Why is the explanation why most of the electoral system protect more the rural areas than the urban areas? Population. A good question mark. But I leave it the thing here. I think that the electoral system and the characteristics of the electoral system can be a part of the explanation of why some resources, instead of going to the city, go to another places. To analyze the characteristics of the electoral laws in the world, it provides a huge, colorful map of diverse things, and I think that explains quite a bit of why things are like they are. And this is why also you will find out that to change the electoral system democratically, it's usually very difficult. Because you are asking to the ones who profit for it to change. Isn't that against nature, against human nature? Then here we are touching the perfection of democracy, the improvement of democracy. How are we going to improve our democracy? Well, that's another day.
Lorsque je vous entendais, Monsieur Clos, deux personnages sont présentés à moi. Il y a d'abord un architecte français qui disait « Ces problèmes urbains nous dépassent, mais feignons quand même d'en être les organisateurs ». Le deuxième, c'est un ancien secrétaire général de l'Union des villes africaines qui disait que le monde aujourd'hui est gouverné par des intérêts géostratégiques. Et la mondialisation génère, au moins dans une certaine étape historique, la marginalisation et l'exclusion. Mais elle permet aussi de cheminer à l'humanité, de cheminer vers de nouvelles solidarités, au lieu d'être un phénomène subi. Et la ville aujourd'hui, on ne le dit pas assez, est devenue un enjeu sécuritaire majeur. Parce que les conflits armés ces 30 dernières années ont pour champ de prédilection les villes. Et il y a eu même une étude qui a été faite par la Rand Corporation américaine. On dit sur 225 sorties des Marines, 180 ont eu lieu dans les villes. Ensuite, le terrorisme s'exprime dans les villes. Donc les villes deviennent une préoccupation non seulement économique, sociale, mais stratégique et sécuritaire. Quel type de gouvernance alors aujourd'hui dans ce contexte aussi complexe? La deuxième question, c'est, je sors d'une région d'Afrique, l'Afrique subsaharienne, où les gouvernements locaux prélèvent à peine 1% de la matière imposable produite dans leur localité. À peine 1%. 1%. 1%. Ah, oui, les gouvernements locaux. Et l'essentiel des autres ressources sont collectées par l'État, mais qui ne retrocèdent toujours pas aux gouvernements locaux ce qui leur revient. Et les gouvernements locaux se trouvent dans l'impossibilité de prester des services aux populations. Et donc, les populations, en contrepartie, refusent de payer les taxes, faute de contrepartie en service. Le troisième problème, vous avez parlé de l'économie informelle et de la ville informelle. Vous savez, beaucoup de gens, les exodes ruraux de ces dernières années, dans nos pays, en Afrique centrale surtout, ce que je connais, sont dus au fait que la ville présente beaucoup d'opportunités. Accès à l'éducation, accès à la citoyenneté, accès au logement, accès aux droits. Mais la dynamique de production urbaine rejette vers la périphérie ceux qui ne peuvent pas s'insérer dans la ville. Alors, à la périphérie, ils construisent donc au fil du temps une ville informelle qui génère une économie informelle et qui se développe plus que l'économie formelle. Et ça, c'est comme un cercle vicieux dans lequel nous vivons. Alors, quel type de gouvernance, selon vous, comme directeur d'ONU Habitat, vous pouvez suggérer dans ce cas?
As I have said, I don't have the answer because this is a global issue, it's a cosmic issue in a sense. But if 50% of the population is already in cities, and this is going to increase, to me it's quite clear that we need to change the rule of the game. We are playing with the rules of the game when the urban population was 20% of the population, or even 30%. But now that we are going towards 50 or 65%, I think that the rules, in one day or in another, I don't know which generation, I don't know if it's going to be the Arabic Spring, or it's going to be, somebody will need to say, okay, we need to rebalance that, because you are explaining very well. 1% of the revenue, this is inconceivable. And then there's another history to complicate a little bit more the thing. The modern state in the 20th century, at least in the developed world, took a different role, an expanded role, which didn't have in the 19th century, and it was the welfare state. And then the public finances went from 18 to 20% of the GDP to 40% of the GDP, because we included education and health and lodgement and settlements as a service provided by the welfare state. This was the huge change and the huge legitimacy of the modern state. But now, lately, in the last, let's say, 10 years or 15 years, we are cutting back in the welfare state. But this cutting back, it's transformed in reduction of taxes, but not in redistribution of taxes. And the local authority is challenged in a new way, at least in the developed world. Because when the welfare state works at full steam, your poor people is taken care by the state. Transferences, economic transferences, which go directly from the social security of the state to the people. And your people has needs in health and in education which are covered. But with the crisis of the welfare state, the poor people which don't have the protection anymore of the state and cannot pay the sources, what they do? To whom they reclaim? Where they go to ask for some help in education or health? To the local authority. And in that, here we have a very interesting downsizing cycle by which the welfare state cuts taxes and puts more demand in the local government, which neither is receiving more transferences from the state. And this is, an unsustainable cycle. You know, sometimes we ask, why our cities are taking this gloomy mood? Why things are not as optimistic as they were 20 years ago? Well, if you add all these factors, you approach some kind of answer. I agree with you.
Good evening. My name is Elon Mbasi. I'm the Secretary General of the United Cities and Local Government of Africa. You know, Dr. Clos, is every time you speak is honey in my ears. and it is honey because you are not sitting with ministers, with governments, central governments. And for us to have an advocate like you sitting with these people is tremendously important. My question is this, and you are right when you say that good taxes are for the state, bad ones are for local governments. There is another solution: sharing of good taxes. And some countries have succeeded to push for this sharing. For example, in some countries in Africa, you have one of the good taxes, VAT, who is now shared between the central government and local government. The problem is that it's the central government who says, this is what we collected, and this is what we want to share with you. The local government don't have the knowledge of what is being collected in their territories as VAT, and even if the sharing is appropriate, they don't have control on what is being shared.
Thank you. I think that this is the way that we can pragmatically conquer. It's that exercise of sharing. And as you say, there are good experiences in that sense. Always difficult to reach the agreement, but at least we are seeing some capacity of advancing in my own country. Sorry for referring, but it's the one that I know theoretically I can speak of. But practically, in our country, it was the creation of the autonomous system of governance, by which now we have a decentralization of part of the income tax, and I think that also VAT, and it's working. I think that it's important. To also to explain these successes, because there are ways, and as how is said that in English, if there's will and there's mean, or how
if there's a will, there's a way.
Okay, there's if there's a will, there's a way. Okay, let's insist on that. Thank you.
So, Dr. Clos, I'm just going to sit by you just as we wrap up. Tudo bem?
Tudo bem.
Okay, I've been learning Portuguese during the discussion. The mayor of Porto Alegre was called away, and I'm just sending his apology. So I'm sorry he wasn't part of this discussion. But it's very obvious that UN Habitat and you, Dr. Clos, it's the beginning of a dialogue, and I feel like I'm interrupting a great conversation, but it will continue. People will see you at other venues. People will see you this evening as well. So I want to thank you very much for your participation. This really is just the beginning. And if somebody had told me this morning I would enjoy listening to a discussion for an hour and a half about taxes, I would have told them they were crazy. But I really did enjoy the back and forth and your conversation, and I hope there will be a lot more. So on behalf of UN Habitat and UNACLA, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. I want to wish you a very successful and a very enjoyable Metropolis 2011. Now, I was going to give a special award to anybody who could render Dr. Clos speechless. Nobody has won that award. And I just want to say that my name is Femi Oke. It has been my great pleasure to be your host. Good evening.
Thank you. Thank you.